All right, so we're going to get started. We're going to talk about educating the next generation of open source contributors. I will mention that the next slide actually has some links, but it's all been uploaded to Sketch. So you're welcome to have a look at the slides. There is a slide full of links that I'll show you towards the end. And we are going to open it up early-ish for audience questions. So as we're asking the first couple of questions, be thinking about what you want to ask us. We're going to start with some very short introductions. So I am Dawn Foster. I am a consultant. I am also the director of data science at the Chaos Project. I've been doing this open source thing for 25 years. So I've been doing it for a long time, and I am passionate about bringing the next wave of contributors into open source. Ruth.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ruth Ikegah, and I'm a community manager at the Chaos Project. I specifically lead the African chapter. And I also have a lot of other hats in other open source communities in Africa, like the Open Source Community Africa. And I think I'm so excited about this panel because for the past 5 years of my career, I have dedicated it to getting in more contributors from Africa. So I'm excited to speak about what I've been doing and, those challenges we face. So, yeah.
Good morning, my name is Steve Walli. My day job is I work for Microsoft, but my night job is I'm adjunct faculty at Carnegie Mellon University. And over the last 5 years, I've been building out a course on software engineering and open source.
Hi folks, Leslie Hawthorn. I am director in Red Hat's open source program office. At the start of my career in open source 20 plus years ago, I was involved in a program called Google Summer of Code, created the high school program that is now known as Google Code-In, and have had a deep passion about introducing new contributors to open source software projects throughout the course of my career. So I'm really excited to be here with folks today.
All right, let's go to Leslie for our first question. So you mentioned you were involved in the early days of Google Summer of Code. So why don't you talk about some of the early goals of the program and then how it's evolved over the years?
I am deeply unqualified to comment on its evolution past 2010, but I will start with what I know. So the notion of Google Summer of Code was to give university students an opportunity to have summer jobs that were related to software engineering, because it turns out depending on where you live or depending on what your class schedule looks like, it's actually really difficult to get an internship at a technology company. So the idea was send kids to flip bits, not flip burgers, right? So we would pair folks with a mentor from an open source software project to complete a time delineated set of software features or fixing problems, adding new features to a project, etc. It was about it was a 3-month course. It's been a long time. I think the thing that I found really interesting about participating in this program was not just seeing the opportunity for future talent to get a start with working in software development during their university education, but to actually have the opportunity to do real-world software development and to understand what it is like to work in a code base that is complex and requires long-term maintenance, and to understand that drive-through contributions are useful, but there's going to be a lot more going on with your code when you are done with that. So I still get calls and emails from like random people being like, hey, thanks for Summer of Code 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I got a job, I'm doing like living my passion project, I'm working for this non-governmental organization, or I'm doing something to make the world a better place. And each time I hear one of those stories, it gives me great and deep joy.
Awesome. Thanks, Leslie. So let's kick it over to Steve. Why don't you tell us more about the open source course that you've been teaching and how you've integrated internships as a part of the curriculum?
Sure, that was actually the interesting part, is we were looking at how do you take something like Google Summer of Code, but build it into an actual, kind of regular term curriculum. And that was the first couple of iterations. And the big aha was, okay, the lectures were just decorating some topics in software engineering across the students. But the real brunt of the work, the real learning for them was each student would have their own project with an industry mentor in an open source project. After 2 iterations of that at Johns Hopkins University, we realized this isn't going to scale. And the fact that we had 60 students through it at that time was shocking to us, that we'd actually had 60 students succeed that way. And we'd even done a little bit of distance learning with the second time through, we added some students in Galway, Ireland. The following summer, though, I had the chance to do this as a summer internship course at Carnegie Mellon University, and that changed everything. The Carnegie Mellon always co-teaches, so we had 2 of us at the front of the class. The real professor's requirement was that we turned around and do this in teams. So it's suddenly a team of 5 students with a couple of industry mentors. And they have a big project to do over the course of the summer, and they have to do it together. So they're learning about teamwork, and it's this idea that this is that first look at real software that so many students get. And it's been hugely gratifying to see it scaling up. So we're excited right now. We've been through 3 iterations of that.
Okay, I'm going to have a question for Ruth, but think about your questions because I'm going to open it up for audience questions after this next one. So Ruth, why don't you share more about what you've done to help educate and encourage the next wave of open source contributors from Africa?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll divide this question in different parts. First, I'd like to talk about the demography of contributors that, Africa is such a big continent with so many countries, and it's important that I talk about how far we've come in terms of like open source, the open source movement, and that didn't start until about, say, 7 years ago, where, people, Google coding, Samson, participated in Google coding, went outside of, his continent and saw that experience and decided to bring it back. So over the past 7-10 years, we've evolved in, attracting people to adopt open source. And so we're at that phase where we're trying to also get people to build projects. Now, what I've done, there's a lot that I have to talk about in 5 minutes, so I'll be really fast. So for example, with the Chaos Africa, chapter in the Chaos Project, when I started open source, that was 5 years ago, and I just, evolved from like microbiology into tech. So I was a proper beginner in terms of technology in general, and also approaching open source. And I had those peculiar challenges of understanding what, the technology is about, what the tools are about, what communication platforms are there. So in that bid to understand those things, I was like, okay, this is actually where I will shine to help people get more involved in this technology that seems so difficult. And then I started creating those pathways, those ways to help other people contribute. And what did that involve? Talking about the Chaos Project. So I joined the Chaos Project very early on, and I started advocating, come look at this cool project. You can do X, Y, Z. You can contribute in this way. So I was doing a lot of advocacy through workshops, even as simple as teaching people how to create a commit on a repository. So creating those little ways that people could, contribute to the software without having to figure out a lot of the technical bits, so breaking it down through articles. And then I think after a while with the Chaos Project, I did this contract with GitHub where it was mostly about educating African open source contributors, people that, not just students, right? Anybody, the youth, because we have a very large youth population. So how do you get people to understand what open source is and make their first contribution? So we designed this program that it used to be called All in Africa in the past, but we designed this program to help bring in more diversity, help people make their first contribution through a curriculum. So learn about open source, because now there are different ways people could learn about open source. There are YouTube videos, communities, documentation, but we developed that curriculum to help people learn, then actually practice to make a first contribution, right? And also I'm part of the Open Source Community Africa. We had literally an open source week last week in Lagos. We had ChaosCon Africa, a lot of events. And what we've been doing with Open Source Community Africa is also the same thing. Try to educate people, try to create local regions across different countries, because again, it's not just one country. We're looking at 54 countries. So we try to educate people, try to create ways that people can create local communities in their region and really attend to open source in the way that benefits them, because there are different challenges. One country, Nigeria, is different from how somewhere like South Africa approaches technology, right? So we have those chapters where people can, create local, smaller communities and just meet in their circle and understand what open source is and, figure out solutions. So I think in a wrap, I would say I've been doing a lot of like advocacy work in like breaking down what a technology that seems very technical looks like into smaller bits and like recommending projects that people could actually participate in, because I think one of the most difficult parts with getting involved in open source is knowing where to start or knowing what project to actually, even though you already have your own programming language, like knowing what project to actually get involved with. So yeah, that's the work I've been doing the past 5 years.
Awesome, thank you. So as promised, I'm happy to open it up for audience questions. Anybody have a question for the panel about how to build the next generation of open source contributors? And since it's recorded, I'm going to run the mic around.
Thank you. My name is Andreas Tille. I'm the current Debian project leader, and my platform contains the plan to increase the diversity in gender and in geographic aspects. And in my last talk, I prepared a map about the density of developers, which means the number of developers in a country divided by the number of people living in this country. And this was a kind of interesting map, and specifically in Africa, we had all white, except of South Africa, where we have some developers. And probably we have not the proper means as a volunteer project to reach out, because, well, we are doing Google Summer of Code and something like this, but volunteers are not really good to go to people and say, please, do you want to join us? Because I really prefer just coding. It's just fun, and running around to seek for people, we are not good at. Do we have some other things we could enhance? Go ahead.
So when you're dealing with a highly specialized project like Debian, I think that the most successful way you're going to be able to outreach to new contributors is to go and look for highly specialized areas where they may be hanging out and doing fun stuff. So I can think like hardware hacking labs. This is going to sound so asinine. This other stuff that's close to operating systems and bare metal, and actually trying to find students who are interested in systems programming these days is actually kind of challenging. Go make friends with your local universities. Go to the heads of the engineering departments, explain to them what you're doing, and if they have bright students who are looking for some extracurricular activities to get some extra credit, to send them your way. And then when you successfully do that, then tell them to tell their professor friends. And I realize that's probably a pretty dissatisfying answer because it doesn't scale. It's very word of mouth driven. It takes time. And the unfortunate reality is building community takes time, because it's about nurturing relationships, and building authentic engagement with other people is not something you can scale.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing to it, because like she said, like Debian is so like technical, right? And you need to also be ready to educate people, not just how to contribute to the software, but what does Debian mean? Like how can I, like, how does it apply to me as a student, right? Like what importance is it? Like how does it fit in the world? Or like, so you need to be able to educate people about like Debian, like the technology itself, learn how to use it, not just how to contribute to it. So it gives them that sense, because whenever I want to start a project, I've worked with a lot of beginners. When they want to look at a project, they look at, oh, like I just learned JavaScript. So sometimes, how do I contribute to a project like Debian? So you need to, and people are usually open with adopting new things. So you need to be able to attract them in that way that feels, peculiar to them. But I maybe would love to chat after the panel.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that, so I've had to be very selective with the big communities that I go to, because I'm not, and I don't mean this to sound bad.
Just go ahead.
Google Summer of Code, because of its sheer scale and success, is a bit of a cattle call.
Yep.
And so I'm responsible for student learning outcomes, like they're paying money to get something back from our program. So I've had to be very careful. I've started with folks in the OpenStack community, and they are fantastic mentors. And I've expanded that over the last few years to include Eclipse projects, and I've just started working with Apache now. And again, it's not all Apache projects. I'm being very careful and selective in how I'm going in. But it takes time, and that's the hard part. I do have an idea how I can scale. There's an underlying thing that I'm still chasing. The underlying thing that I'm chasing is what started this whole program. We've got an entire generation or two of developers now that have no understanding of what a dependency is. When everything is free, and so now we've ended up in a world where we're all trying to batten down the hatches, and these security problems in the supply chain are horrible. Okay, there's a reason for that, because everything was free and nobody understands software engineering anymore. So again, I'm coming at the problem from the other side. I'm using open source projects as this fantastic lab, but the problem I'm trying to solve is one of software engineering.
When can we go to your TED Talk on this topic? Yeah. One last really quick point, very tactical. Go to Chaos Communications Congress, go to the kids track.
Yes.
If you want a community of people who will be predisposed to consideration of software freedom as a primary objective, you will find them there.
Can I kind of add to that in a bit? That it may be that people aren't interested just in your project, but they're interested in open source. And if you're trying to do a local thing, find other enthusiastic people in your local area, get together, and it's not about marketing, it's about being enthusiastic and communicating that. And so getting people together and getting them enthused about open source, some of them will come to your project, others will come to other projects, and that's kind of fine, right?
There was a nice person who had their hand up back here. Oh, I have lied.
No, there was a hand.
I did, I thought, oh, yay, okay.
There was somebody.
So in a lot of these conversations that I'm very glad that we're having about how we create sort of this next generation of open source contributors, and I also have a lot of questions about how we create even just junior engineers, let alone open source engineers. But I think there's this maybe dichotomy that some of us operate in, that people are either working for a company like Microsoft or Red Hat and sponsored by their employer, or they're indie. And I think there's a large space in between of people working for companies of like 20, 30 people doing React projects and things like that. How do we invite those people into these projects?
I have opinions.
You should share your opinions.
This may not necessarily be a popular opinion. One of the most compelling arguments that I ever heard about the reason why we should be supporting the development of inner source software as a movement and a culture is because there are so many businesses where people aren't working for a Microsoft or Red Hat. They're at a small and medium enterprise. There's 20 to 30 people in a tech shop. They're using open source. They'd love to contribute their changes back because carrying a fork sucks. Or there are people who are working in the IT departments of places that aren't tech companies. I mean, I've been working with a maintainer in the CNCF who works for DHL, for goodness sake. I mean, the dude makes sure I get my packages. But if we are working to create cultures of knowledge sharing, breaking down silos, not reinventing the wheel, being able to work collaboratively together inside of a business, it becomes that much easier to take the next step to participate in external communities because you've already built that muscle memory by working with your peers in a safer environment.
And I actually just want to build on that. One of the most exciting things I discovered, because I've had to teach myself pedagogy, there was an anthropologist named Jean Lave, and she did all this phenomenal work back in the 70s and 80s. And what it comes down to is all learning is social learning. And so what you have in an open source project is actually this perfect learning laboratory, where if it is a community project, so it's not merely published under an open source license, but there is actually a community there. The better communities are already predisposed to educating people coming in. So that's why, to me, this was this perfect kind of fitting of software engineering. Yes, we need to improve this. Oh, look at these great laboratories.
Okay. Hi, my name is Victory Brown, and I'm a designer at Super Bloom. I think I'm enjoying the conversation, but a lot of things that I hear are technical. What's the plan for, because as technology evolves, people are also evolving in skill, and we have engineers who contribute to open source, and then at a point, there's just going to be a lot of engineers and maybe nobody to manage them if we think about how people share their time between open source and their day job. What are the plans for educating the next generation of OSS contributors that are non-code contributors? So people who want to be community managers, for instance, people who want to be designers, people who want to be project managers. From my continent, we get a lot of, I would say personally, all of my skill I got from contributing to open source. I got into open source as a blank slate, and I learned to design and do all of these things there. So, but there's literally no pathway that's like structured or documented somewhere. If you go to a code base, you can easily find how to contribute as a engineer. There's like a documentation for that, but not many of them talk about non-code contributors. So like, we're also the next generation of OSS contributors. What are you thinking about when it comes to that?
I continue to have opinions.
Yeah, so I think I'll start, and then Leslie will talk about her opinions. So when I joined the Chaos Project, one of the interesting things, like the Chaos Project is such an interesting project. We do metrics and open source software, right? We have different ways that people can contribute, actually, not just code. So we have software, we have the metrics. But then when I joined as a Python. I was writing Python at the time. And when I looked around me, there were other people, like she said, people that were not just engineers. There were people that were designers, like different fields, right? So I was like, how do you get people to contribute to chaos, right, to this project? So when we started the African chapter, what I did was we had focus groups. Each of the focus groups, one was developers, designers. We had the research focus group as well, because at that time we had the researcher join the community. So we had the research focus group, we had technical writers, those fields that are not so common. So why was those groups important? It was because people would meet, like I said, the early starts, like people would meet in those smaller groups to discuss how can I improve this project as a technical writer? What are the problems that I can solve? So when you create those spaces, because originally, like she said, when you go to some popular open source projects, you only find ways to get involved as a developer. So if you are creating those spaces for people that are not originally software engineers to get involved, then when they come, they would find those problems. Because I know one of the biggest things for maintainers is there's so many things to do, like how do I write code and attend to designers? There's so many responsibilities. But when you create those spaces, people will come and people will figure out the problems or the solutions to, and find ways to contribute.
I just wanted to quickly add something before we turn it over to you.
I'm sorry to be.
No, so I do live in a world where I'm looking for student outcomes that are around the engineering. But I believe Ariel Fox is giving a talk here, and she's been working in that space around designers and open source design for a number of years now. And so I would encourage you, if you're looking at those, because...
I was going to say, I think Victor
Okay.
is her coworker. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, didn't know.
You should come up here and give this part of the segment.
We could switch. Yeah. Yeah, but what you were saying, Ruth, is so important. Is it's making that space. If you don't make the space, it will be whatever space has been made already around you. So you have to continue to build those spaces.
So one of the reasons why we actually long ago created a high school focus program at Google, which was renamed to Google Coded, which was a great name because I was really bad at naming things, was one, we recognized a desire to create contribution opportunities for students who were pre-university. And the other reason was because we understood that there was just so much work in open source software projects that needed to be done. And maybe someone who's, 10 years old is not going to be a great software engineer. Some of them are, but that's not typical. But they are potentially excellent marketers. They are great at writing content. They are good designers. There are many different ways to contribute, and we made all of those contributions something that we're equally valued and equally rewarded in the context of the program, to make sure that it was very clear that open source project contributions do not just consist of code. For projects that are looking for help outside of code contributions, an actual help wanted sign is very useful, right? In your code repository, it could say like, good first issue or help wanted. Our website is terrible. Please make it better. Here are some things we have noticed that are terrible that we need help with. Because if you do not actually let the entire world know that you want that help, no one will ever think to provide it to you. And then the other place where I see this consistent impedance mismatch, and I think we'll get to better success over time as we are now, software projects, unsurprisingly, are filled with a bunch of software developers who understand that other areas are important, but they are not their area of expertise. So they may be hesitant to try to bring people in to work on that stuff, because I know that I am very bad with anything related to design, and I don't want to talk to anyone about design because they will literally say, I made the changes you requested, and my response to them will be, I can't see them. Can you tell me what they are? I cannot be the only nerd of this variety. So, if you are a passionate
I wander
individual.
around in ignorance all the time.
I know, it's really nice there, right? And there's coffee and friends. The other thing is, if you are a deeply passionate person with extra time and extra energy, which is not all of us, rocking up to your favorite open source project and saying, hi, my name is Leslie, and I am very good at marketing and communications, and I would like to help you in your success. No one is ever going to say no to you. They really won't. They will say, hi, we're so glad you're here. We don't know how to ask for your help, but we would appreciate it. And then you negotiate from there. And thank you for everything you do with Superbloom.
Hello, I have a question. So Stephen, you said something that resonated and kind of blew my mind a little bit, which is that a lot of your students, they have no concept of what a dependency is. Yeah. And I can't say I'm surprised by it, even though my head exploded. But so somebody had to ask about AI, so it might as well be me. Given where we are with AI-generated code, I see those kind of issues being exacerbated. I also see that we're kind of in a Jurassic Park moment with AI-generated code, right? Control is an illusion, life finds a way. People are going to do what they're going to do, and our attempts to control it, rein it in, regulate it, build frameworks might be futile. And I also kind of think that in 5 to 10 years, the way that we think about open source software and communities and the way it gets made might change in ways we can't predict. So given all of those realities, well, this is for all of you, but I want to start with you. How are you teaching your students to deal with the world that we're in? And then what would you say to the rest of us for like, what do we do?
I'm recommending animal husbandry and goat farms.
We were talking about plumbing and house framing before we got up here. No, so actually the question is very relevant, because the thing that I'm seeing is everybody's still at that, let's vibe code something. I did 10,000 lines of code yesterday. And it's like, the course has always been designed from this perspective of real software is built in teams. It always has been. It might be a very small team, but it's still real software is built in teams. And that idea, going back to the Gene Lave idea, the only way software improves over time is that the current people that are knowledgeable educate the next people in it. The tool set we're using is almost irrelevant. When I started, I was replacing card systems and paper tape systems. Yes, I'm that old. But the thing that we're trying to do with the next iteration of the course, and we're being really careful in how we're thinking about this, is so if we take a team with 2 industry mentors, then those mentors, most of them are professional developers working for big companies. I mean, I've got fantastic mentors from Red Hat and IBM and such. Let's take the extra time to use the AI augmented tools, because I've caught glimpses of what it might look like. And what I mean by that is, okay, if you can, as a team, set that tone of, here's all of our context files, here's all of our prompting libraries, how do you checkpoint a model so that we're all looking at a shared context on the model, so that there's some bringing that predictability back into the engineering side of it. That, yeah, okay, we're going to end up with code faster. Some of the, the easier bugs might be almost through to checkpoint before, you have a human in the loop say, yes, those 3 changes should go in. But it's trying to figure out how the tools, and I've seen this done in a couple of teams, not actually where I work, at other places, where they're taking that time, those steps to start to bring some predictability to the engineering that goes into delivering that software system in all of its complexity. So that's the next iteration. So for all of you in the audience, I'm looking for folks from, Apache, Eclipse, whatever, like your maintainers, and you're willing to spend the extra time as a mentor to start to figure this out for how you're going to bring these tools into your open source project. That's what I'm looking for next year.
So, do you mind? So to riff on that, so one of the things that Red Hat's open source program office has been tasked with doing is figuring out how to help software engineers at Red Hat who are using AI and generative AI to do so in a way that does no harm to open source, does allow us to increase our development velocity, and does allow us to interact with open source projects according to their own rules and their customs. Like Red Hat is a steward of the open source ecosystem. We've been doing open source for like 3 decades now. We are not really interested in making open source software projects less healthy, less helpful to other people. But it is an evolution. It's an incredibly fast-paced evolution. It's being driven much more quickly by people who I believe would profit by the discussion going quickly. So I will say, if you are a maintainer who is interested in these topics, please talk to me. Please talk to other folks who are working in big corporate OSPOs and tech, because there are a lot of us who are deeply focused on making sure that as much as we can contribute to getting this right, that we are doing so, because we take this very, very seriously, and we do not think we have all the answers. We need to hear from you so that as we're putting together these best practices, as we are publishing internal documentation for best practices externally and saying, this is our exemplar, please use it if it is valuable to you, we want input to make that the best possible quality it can be.
Yeah, just add in 1 minute. I like that you use the word Jurassic Park, because if not that we're on this panel, we're not here to bring negative words. I would say maybe in the next 10 years, we'll be facing a lot of compliance issues with open source, because we're letting AI, as much as AI is great, right? It's good, it's saving the world, but we're letting AI do a lot of the work for us, while, like you said, in teams, these things are done in teams. People actually have to impact this knowledge, and with AI, there's also that misinformation that can go on, and people can just pick this 10,000 lines of code and just dump in your open source project and create so many issues for you. So we are stewards, we as maintainers, contributors, not just the maintainers, we need to actually impact this knowledge instead of letting AI just do the work.
Yeah, and the metaphor I'm using with folks at work right now, mid-90s, all of a sudden there was this aha moment that, boy, all of those people in Bangalore, they're a whole lot cheaper. We'll just send specs to them and we'll get back code. That didn't work out so well. The companies that seem to have done well with it weren't the ones that were just shipping specs. They were the ones that have invested over the last 25 years to get to a point where they have a Bangalore office. So there's enough cultural transference and linguistic transference that they can now do that. I'm a Canadian living in America with a British wife. I speak 3 different Englishes. India speaks another one. And it's so this idea that, we'll just hand it off to the AI is yeah, tell me how that works out for you. And so that's why I think the experiments right now, we are still in this hype curve where a lot of people will be making money, but I'm hoping that the kind of educational research we're doing, experiments on students, that we're going to get to that point where we actually are backfilling with, this is how you actually, as a team delivering software, use these AI augmented tools.
Okay, we're going to do one final quick question, and then I'll give you each just a second to give your final thoughts.
Okay, this is a 10-point question. No, I'm only joking. I'm Bernard. I'm working on rolling out an open source ERP across sub-Saharan Africa now. So my question is to Ruth. What's the profile of your community of contributors at the moment, and how sustainable do you think it is? Do you see much turnover in that?
Yes, that's a deep question. So profile of contributors, big diversity. We have contributors in every single bucket, from beginners. There are people just getting started with tech in general, because I think in the past 5 years, like after COVID, we had a spread of like, this is how you can learn tech, a lot of boot camps. We had that in like the last 5 years. So there are people that are just beginning with technology in general and then getting into open source. Now we have also like the people that have been there for a couple of years. And I think maybe the person that asked the question at the back about like proprietary people involved in their full-time jobs, there are people that are really very experienced, but then because there are a lot of challenges with, just doing open source software. When you look at the global north, people that do open source software have full-time jobs. They are paid to do this work. So people from this other side, you see people that have full-time jobs that do not have time to do open source because, open source doesn't give them money at that time. So there are those people that I have actually trying to attract them more into open source, because then, when we have a lot of beginners in the field, things do not progress faster. So we have different buckets of people that are interested. Last week, like I said, we had this open source festival that was really big. We had a lot of, in the past 7 years, we've had 4 editions. We bring in like people from different parts of the world to come and talk about open source. So it's a very big community, vibrant as well. I think Stephen can attest to that, and some people who have been to the festival as well. So a very vibrant community. People are willing to adopt. People are willing to build the next thing. And I think in one of the slides I put in, so we're trying to do this accelerator program to get people to build. So we've done a lot of work with getting people to adopt, right? To get people to contribute. Now, how do we get people to actually build software, right? Open source software, because we have more of like the startup ecosystem in Africa is really huge, with like VC funding and all the rest. But now how do we get people to build software, build projects that other people can also rely on? So my community is trying to put that together as an accelerator. So definitely would love to chat, but it's a good place to be in. Yeah.
Okay, in 45 seconds or less, starting with Leslie, what's your key takeaway? What do you want people to walk away from this panel knowing?
If you are like me, you are very nervous and also excited, but mostly nervous about the future of AI. This is the time for all of us who have been doing this for a very, very long time to figure out how we organize ourselves so that we can take all the lessons that we've learned from maintaining complex systems over years and impart them to the next generation, because if we do not, we will not have the opportunity to do so later.
First, I want to say I still value everything that Leslie set up 20 years ago now in Google Summer of Code. I think this laid a foundation that we're all still building on. So I think that was incredibly valuable. And when I look at things like how are we going to deal with, okay, we're stepping into the African continent, how do you deal with that when people they don't have the privilege of, yes, I have a job. They're doing 2 or 3 jobs. And I think that GSOC model of funding actually might be a key. As Ruth said, the Open Source Africa Festival is an amazing event. It's truly terrifying to see that much energy in an audience. I want to go back. Lastly, I am really interested in how this shapes going forward. I am lucky enough that Carnegie Mellon has campuses in Doha, Qatar, and Rwanda in Kigali. And so, we're looking at taking those next steps to figure out how we take this out of a Western, Northern European-centric learning environment and bring this into other places.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's really interesting. One of the questions, Stephen talked about the culture of open source. I think for me, we need to create that sense of belonging. We need to go back to the roots, right? Like, what does open source actually mean? Because I think in the wave of AI, in the wave of how emerging technology is just, approaching us so fast, news everywhere, we're beginning to forget the sense, the culture of open source, the software freedom, that sense of open source. So we need to create space for belonging where people feel like they want to be here. Because the open source community, I think the community is where the heart of open source is. So we need to still maintain that
human connection. We need to also, create that space of onboarding to make it very interesting, because when we talk about the next wave of contributors, no matter what level of experience a person has, when they get started with a project, they are a beginner, no matter how much years of experience you have. So you need to look at your onboarding. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of audits, and I think we do that well at the Chaos Project. So looking at your onboarding phase, where beginners, where people approach the project, how do I make it seamless? Imagine yourself as a beginner, because it takes a lot of time to actually stick to a project. How does a beginner move from just giving their first commit, creating a path of leadership, break down those walls of like hoarding things, like make the path easier for people to move from just being a beginner to being a project maintainer, give people room to make mistakes. Because again, being a beginner, you make mistakes. So give people that room to make mistakes and grow.
Yeah, and looking around the room, there are a lot of us who've been in this industry for a while. And, my ask to you would be, what is, even if it's just one person, what are some ways that you can help some people who are brand new to open source, help some people who are younger get involved in the community, bring them, help them get speaking opportunities, help them, help mentor them and help them, understand what, I don't know, share some of the things that you've learned over the years with some of the next generation. With that, we are, I think, 2 minutes over time. So thank you all so much for coming.